Good morning. I hope the Louvain-la-Neuve atmosphere did not catch too many of you yesterday night, because it seemed that some did not return yet. Be careful, the first week of the academic year is very dangerous. We have the pleasure this morning to welcome Marie Weiss. Marie Weiss is working as a researcher at Avignon at INRA. INRA is a French Research Institute for Agriculture in Avignon. I mean, the location where she is based in Avignon. And she has been developing radiative transfer modeling and inversion of the radiative transfer modeling for many years, decades, I would say, even if she looks very young. And actually, many LAI, I can tell. I was in US, and I look at NASA LAI, I say, oh, your LAI is good. And then I check, and it was Avignon solution. And then you go to China, you look at LAI, you look for the solution. This is Avignon solution. Therefore, I mean, this is one of the reference for LAI retrieval, and therefore we are very pleased to have Marie here to explain this as a, I mean, from the primary source, I would say. And in addition, Marie Weiss, you will see her name regularly because she became recently chief editor of Remote Sensing of Environment, which is the top journal in our field. Maybe we can applaud. Therefore, if your paper is rejected, you will know why.
We will be no relation.
Okay. In the afternoon, or maybe I will explain that later on. Yeah, sure. I'll leave you the floor.
Okay, so thank you for this introduction. Okay, so my talk today will be about, of course, biophysical retrieval and time series smoothing. I will focus mainly on GI and fAPAR, and I will also put the emphasis on Sentinel-2 and high resolution, because we did a lot of work as well on coarse resolution sensors before Sentinel-2 came. So first, Pierre already introduced me a little, but I wanted to... Okay. Okay, got it. Okay, so I just wanted to explain a little bit more what is my institute. So this is a French National Institute of Agronomic Research, and I am in a unit called EMA for Mediterranean environment and modeling of agro-hydro system. And we are mainly focusing on modeling the whole agro-hydro system from the aquifer to the atmosphere. So we are about 100 people. And among these people, I am in the CAPT team. CAPT means sensor and remote sensing in French, capteur and télédétection. And this is a very particular lab unit because we are mixed with, so we are a research unit mixed with one startup and with technical institutes, so who are focusing on specific species, Arvalis on wheat, Terzinovia on sunflowers and rapeseed, and ITB, which is on sugar beet. So the idea of this group is to fill the gap between the research and the application. So we have the startup company who is making the algorithms that are developed at INRA operational, and we have the users here who provide us their requirements, their needs, and help us designing the algorithms. So this is now very interesting, and actually we have a little bit changed our focus. We are working at a very high resolution, centimetric resolution, and we hope also that this work will also contribute to Sentinel-2 algorithms. So these are the different resolutions we are working on and the different instruments. So we have IoTs, which are fixed and acquiring data during the whole growing seasons automatically. We have drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, and we have also some robots going on the ground, acquiring data, and this is very interesting because with that kind of robots we can completely, what should I say, we know exactly the elimination condition and so on, so its data are very easy, are acquired in very good condition and are very easy to process, which is very different from UAV, because UAV you have some elimination conditions that can change during the flight. So, and then we have also Sentinel-2, and we are trying to use these different tools for different applications. So high-throughput phenotyping application, support for decision making, and also resource management at the territory scale. So my expertise, as Pierre already said, since about, I would say, 20 years, I'm working at INRA, and I'm doing some radiative transfer modeling. I also worked on coupling radiative transfer modeling with crab functioning models to do some assimilations. So I'm working also, of course, on the forward sense, but also in inverse sense, trying to invert the model with machine learning techniques to estimate biophysical variables. And also, of course, as we are developing some algorithm, we are trying to validate them. So we did a lot of work as well on ground measurements, on how to measure the biophysical variables and how to validate the algorithm. I also developed some softwares, and especially one software called CANAI to process digital hemispherical images that you will acquire this afternoon, if I understood well the program. Okay. So the outline of my talk is very classical. First, I will talk about the biophysical variable of interest for agriculture, and especially the definition associated to those biophysical variables. And then I will talk about how can we estimate these variables from optical data. I will only focus on optical data, either by empirical calibration or using radiative transfer model inversion. I will develop a little bit radiative transfer models and inversion techniques. And then I will come to how to generate temporal series, either using statistical filters or using some light, small crop functioning model to smooth and as well to predict. Okay. So first, the biophysical variable of interest. So sorry, I'm talking. So if you want to interrupt me and ask some question, that would be very nice. So feel free to ask, so that it's a little bit interactive and that don't fall asleep. Okay. So what can we get as variables from optical data? And so it's not only optical data here. You can get temperature, but it's from thermal infrared. I missed it. Okay. So these are the variables that you can get. So Liffer index, fraction of absorbed photosynthetically active radiation, the green vegetation cover fraction, the albedo, the chlorophyll, the leaf chlorophyll content or the canopy chlorophyll content, the leaf water content or the canopy water content, the dry matter, the soil brightness, so the level of reflectance of the soil, and these different biophysical variables are indeed in relation with some crop processes that I detailed here. So as I said, I will mainly focus on LAI, fAPAR, and vegetation cover fraction, which is quite close from fAPAR. Okay, the problem is that we say biophysical variables, and why do we say biophysical variables? It is because it's estimated from remote sensing data, so from reflectance, from physical quantities. But when you are using such data for agriculture, then you need to use agronomic variables. And sometimes they do not meet the same. So this is what I try to recall here, the difference. So we always say leaf array index, and I'm sorry, because in my presentation I will maybe say leaf array index, but actually there are different leaf array index. The actual leaf array index is when you consider the green and the non-green elements, and when you are doing destructive measurements. That means you take your plant, you cut the leaves, then you measure the surface of the leaf. And over 1 meter square of ground. But you can also consider the plant area index. That means you take everything that constitutes the plants and you measure the different surface and you add everything. And then sometimes what you are looking at is the green elements because you are looking, for example, at photosynthesis. So you don't want the yellow elements. So this is what we call for leaves, green leaf area index, and for plants, green area index. And depending on the way you are measuring, here I speak about ground measurements, you cannot assess, you can just get some of these variables. So if you are using destructive measurements, it's very easy to get those one. You can also get those one. But then if you are using digital hemispherical photograph or LAI 2000, everything which is every instrument that is based on the use of transmittance, then it's different. And if you are looking upward or downward, it's also different. So actually what you are measuring on the ground is plant area index or green area index if you are using, for example, DHP and you are able to make the difference between green and yellow. So you have to be very careful of what you are using, the meaning of what you are using, and what you are looking at, and in your agronomic model or in your ground measurements. So this is an example where we just estimated the green area index from a very old sensor spot. At 20 meter resolution, and looked against the destructive ground leaf area index, so this variable. And if you look, there is quite some discrepancy. But if you are looking at the same thing estimated from the remote sensing data, and you are just using the green area index, which is actually what you see when you are using remote sensing data, then you get a better fit between the ground measurements and your estimates. And then for leaf areas, there is another problem, which is the leaf clumping. So when you are using destructive measurements, you are measuring the true leaf area index, true green area index, if you are using the green. But if you are using indirect measurements, such as transmittance, DHP, LAI 2000, then what you actually get is the effective green area index. That means that the value is retrieved from the green fraction measurements, and you make some assumption to get this value. And the assumption is that you are using the Poisson law, and your canopy is a turbid medium. So this is not, this has an impact on your result. And I will speak about after about relative transfer model inversion and the problem associated to the canopy architecture assumption. And then you have also the apparent green area index, what we call apparent green area index, where first you are using remote sensing data, so you have some yes, I will speak about that after. But you have an algorithm which is used to estimate this GEI, and the kind of GEI you are evaluating depends on these assumptions. For example, if you are looking at the modest GEI, there is some kind of clumping, it is a little bit corrected from clumping. But if you are using, for example, the ProBavi or GOV1 product, there is no clumping taken into account. So again, there are differences between products, and this is my message today that I will repeat. Be careful of what, not be careful of what you are using, but be conscious of what you are using and what it means. Okay, now if we go to the fAPAR, there are several definitions as well, and it's much more complicated. So the definition is rather simple. It's a fraction of photosynthetically active radiation, so between 400 and 700 nanometer, which is absorbed by the green vegetation. So I put green in parentheses because you have also some kind of photosynthesis for yellow elements. When you are measuring it, if you want to measure it with accuracy, then you need to use PAR radiation balance method. So that means you put some PAR sensor to get the incident PAR, to get the incident PAR reflected by the soil, the PAR reflected by the soil, the PAR reflected by the canopy, and the PAR that is reaching the soil background. And then your fAPAR, which depends on the direction of the incident radiation, is written like this, where you get the canopy, it's transmittance. It's canopy reflectance, and the canopy transmittance. Okay, sorry, this one. Okay, so if you, oh yes, okay, excuse me, sorry. So if you develop this equation, then you get this, and you get here the gap fraction. If you consider that the leaves are black, because it is a transmittance. And when you are using LAI 2000 or DHP, you consider that the part that is reflected by the soil is negligible, which is possible if the soil background is quite dark. And the part reflected by the canopy is also negligible, but because you are in the visible domain. So finally, what you can say is that your fAPAR can be approximated, but you make two approximations by the gap fractions. Okay, so this is what we call 1 minus gap fraction, what we call the fEPAR, intercepted PAR. And so that means this would be between 400 and 700 nanometers. But if you then assume that leaves are black, it's 1 minus the gap fraction. So many assumptions if you want to get the fAPAR. Again, it's something which is different. Okay, and then when you are using agronomic models, what you are doing is you want to estimate the biomass. You use a light use efficiency, very classical light use efficiency model, and you need the fAPAR over time. So that means you need to consider the total fAPAR, which is the sum of the direct fAPAR plus the diffuse fAPAR, weighted by the diffuse fraction. So two quantities. And the diffuse fAPAR, so there should be a diff here, is the integration over the whole hemisphere of the direct fAPAR. So that means that this variable is very variable during the day and depending on the atmospheric conditions. Okay. Okay. So actually, when you are using remote sensing products, you get only the direct fAPAR, and generally it's normalized at a given time. So again, this is not the same fAPAR that you will use in an agronomic model. Okay, so these are the I'm finished for the definition.
You have one question.
Yeah.
But one of the assumptions that the reflection by the ground, by the soil, is negligible. At the early stage of the crops, is not true.
It depends on the. I mean, this assumption you can do it. I would say it's a very. I put a threshold, but when the soil background is around 0.3, it's okay. In 400 and 700 nanometers, it's generally the case. But if you have a very bright soil, I don't know, rocks or kind of sand or something like that, then it may cause some difficulty. But of course, the denser the canopy, the best your approximation is. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Okay, so now I come to the how can we estimate biophysical variables from optical data. So with remote sensing, we have some spectral information with a selection of wavebands, some directional information, which is induced by the orbitography of the sensor. So you have some illumination conditions, sun condition, and also the view angle from the satellite. You have also some spatial information, which depends on the spatial resolution of your sensor, but also on the what we call the point spread function. That means the spatial response of your sensor, which is different from the gridding. And you have also some revisit frequency. So what you want to do is to estimate what is called a crop trait, sorry. So which was defined as a morphological, biochemical, physiological, structural, phenological, or behavioral characteristics that influence organism performance or fitness. This is a definition which is actually also applied to human being or other objects than vegetation. But you can estimate those different, you want to estimate those different traits. And the thing is that your traits are generally not directly measured by remote sensing. You are obliged to use a model to get your data, to get your trait or variable. The variable is the estimation of a trait with a method. So you need a model or you need some relationship to get your variable of interest from the reflectance data. So you have different level of models. So and this is a scheme that shows that simply there are microwave and LiDAR, but it's okay also for optical remote sensing. That this relationship has different complexity depending on the variable you are interested in, and it may involve many processes between the reflectance that you are measuring and your variable of interest. So, for example, if you look at Chlorophyll, you have many processes which interact to be related to the optical remote sensing. So we have distinguished. So this is a paper that will be published soon in RSC, where you have we have made a kind of a review of application of remote sensing in agriculture. So you can find a lot of references, and it can be of interest for you if you want to go deeper after this training course. So what we say is we have two kinds of variables. We have canopy primary variables, which are directly involved in radiative transfer modeling. For example, the leaf area index and the leaf inclination, because they are actually variables that are used in radiative transfer modeling. And you have secondary variables, for example, yield, which is not directly linked to the radiative transfer model. So the question is, how can I go from this to this? And also, you can go from the canopy variable. Sorry, I made the wrong sense for the for the arrow. You can also go in the direct sense, which is I model from I know the structure of my canopy, I know the optical properties of my elements, and I want to simulate my signal. And this is your information. Your information is the information of geometry, an information of location. So location, sometimes the surface type, the canopy type you get, or things like that. You have an information of time as well, and you have some spectral information. And with that, you want to estimate your variable. Okay, so the problem is you have only several reflectances, several bands, you have only several acquisition, you have only several directions, and you have also some uncertainties in your reflectance, and you have also some uncertainties in your algorithm to retrieve your variables, and all of that give you some possible solutions. That means here, for example, you have a reflectance which is simulated. You have the measured reflectance is here, and with some noise. And you are simulating reflectances with those combination of INRA index and chlorophyll. And all of these solutions are going into what you could measure. So that means the problem is ill-posed. You don't have enough information, proper information, to be sure of what you are estimating. So you can get several combinations of variables, providing the same set of reflectances. So what you need to do is to do some regularization, to better constrain your model, your inversion, and to better get more accuracy on your variable, on your estimated variable. So, and it depends a little bit on your problem, because if you are acting at large scale, you have very little information, for example, on the surface you are looking at. While if you are at the regional or local scale with Sentinel-2, for example, you can have a crop mask. You can know which crop you are looking at. So it's easier to put some prior information in your algorithm and to improve the accuracy of your estimation. Okay, so there are several methods, as I said, either to go to your primary variables or to secondary variables. The first one, the simplest one, and the first one that was developed in the past, is to use empirical relationships, either using reflectance or vegetation indices. And you can do that either for primary variable or for secondary variable. Then you can also estimate primary variables using radiative transfer model inversion. So this is the outline, yes. And finally, you can also go through canopy secondary variable using both radiative transfer model inversion and crop functioning. So the radiative transfer model estimates are used to update the crop functioning model and to better retrieve secondary variable, or to even prognostic the yield, for example. So first, I speak about the empirical methods, which many of you know, because I saw some posters, and maybe you will not learn a lot, depending on your topic of interest. Okay, so this is very simple. How do you set up your empirical methods? You have your primary variable, your observation, and you are using a fitting technique. But your problem will be which configuration will I use for my observation? Which fitting technique will I choose? And for the calibration, the principle, the main question is how to build the training data set. So for the observational, so I will just follow this. I will first begin by this and speak about the fitting technique, and then how to set up the training data set. So for the observational configuration, actually, if you are using a sensor, you don't really have the choice. You use what you have. But you can use either the reflectance and take a selection in some spectral bands, if you want, depending on the variable you are interested in. Or you can use also vegetation indices, which are used since a long time, very classical. And possibly you can also use other explanatory variables, which are, for example, the condition of your acquisition, the sun position, or the location, or the crop type. You can, for example, calibrate different empirical relationships depending on if you are looking at maize or wheat or things like that. So, and you have many index in the literature, and they are all set to be particularly sensitive to vegetation and to be the most insensitive as possible as all the disturbing effects like atmosphere, soil, background, or solar illumination. So this was, as you can see, this was defined as a long time ago. So if you want a list of vegetation indices, there is an index database. We have the address here, where you get, I don't know, about 200 or something like that, vegetation indices in the literature. And they also provide the variables, for example, if it is for chlorophyll, leaf row index, or things like that. So this can be interesting if you want, if you want to use vegetation indices. And you have also some reviews and some comparison of the different indices. Okay, and as I said, with vegetation indices, you can try to estimate anything you want. It can work or not, but you can try at least. So you have some paper which are providing some relationship with yield, with chlorophyll, with fAPAR, leaf row index, cover fraction, mainly. Okay, so now the fitting technique. At the beginning also, the people were trying to fit some functions where they know the shape, so generally exponential function, for example, or linear relationships, and they can only use few explanatory variables. That means the reflectance eventually, yes, or the vegetation indices. And what you do is you are using a training data set to fit your relationship, and then you're validating on the test data set. And generally, what you need is to have a full independent training and validation data set, which is the hard thing to get, because if you do that on measurements, for example, it's not easy to have a lot of points. So this is quite tricky, and so many of you have used already some cross-validation, for example, and so on. And also you need to, I don't know if I put it, yes, you need also to, for example, from years to years, and to look at the variability of condition to be sure that your empirical relationship is robust. Okay, so now since a long time also, about 20 years, the machine learning algorithm were developed. And so the idea of the machine learning is that you don't know the shape of the function, and it can be more complex because you can use other explanatory variables, and this allows you to better fit your data. The problem is sometimes it overfits the data, so it's working very well where you calibrate, validate, but then if you apply it in another context, it can be you can get quite bad results. So everything depends on your objective and when and where you want to apply your empirical relationship. But for me, it's still a good solution. It depends on the use. Still, the question is, what is your objective? What do you want to get? And do you need a robust relationship or not? I mean, not, or you have very repeatable conditions or things like that. So this is a question that one should ask, because the thing is that empirical relationships are generally better than model inversion if you are just focusing on a given, on given conditions. So you have to be yes, very aware of what you want to use and for what. So as I said, you have many relationships depending on the calibration data set. So this is an old slide about the MODIS LIFRA index backup algorithm. As you may know, the MODIS algorithm is working, is not the same. You apply different relationships depending on the kind of biome you are looking at. And you can see the different biome relationships that are used in the MODIS backup algorithm. So here it is the same, but this is a paper from Anatoly Gitelson, where he used the NDVI, the well-known NDVI, and another vegetation index he developed, very near from the NDVI. You just multiplied the near infrared reflectance by a number. And he looks at the calibration, at empirical relationship to get the vegetation fraction. So these are for different, 3 different crops. And this is for the same crop, but for here and here for 2 years. So as you can see, the relationship is different for the crops, and depending on the crop, and depending on the year as well. And so, as I said, if you want to use that just to make some interpolation, for example, throughout the year or something like that, well, use your empirical relationship. But if you want to apply your empirical relationship calibrated in 1998 in 2002, then you will get bad results. So, because the environment is different, because I don't know if it is at the same place, but actually maybe the location is different, so the soil properties are different, and the climate is different, so you can get very different canopy between here and here. Okay, now if I go to the neural network. So I put here the neural net example. You have many machine learning algorithms. You have support vector machine, random forest regression, Gaussian processes, and so on. So you can find many papers in the literature which are using this kind of techniques. And they are implemented actually in any software such as MATLAB, R, Python, or whatever. So it's very easy to use. And so I put neural net because I'm working with neural net since 20 years. It's much easier for me to explain you how it works. And also they have been proven very efficient. And also, maybe I will speak about that after, but my personal feeling is not, the method is not actually very important. What is important is the way you are implementing your method. You have specific parameters for each method, and the crucial thing is not actually the method, it is the training data set. Because you don't want to overfit, you want to generalize, and so on and so on. And sometimes the training data set is also a little bit linked to the method you are using. For example, if you are using Gaussian processes, you need less training data than for neural networks. So you have a good paper, I think it's cited here, about, from Johan Verhelst in RC in 2012, if I remember, where he compares the different techniques, and you have a description of the techniques and the way he's conceiving his training data sets. It's very interesting. Okay, so I come back to the neural nets. So neural nets are quite simple. In fact, you have some your reflectance as input. Sometimes you can add also the geometry or I don't know if you know the solid background reflectance. You can put the solid background reflectance, for example. Then you have a step of normalization. Just I mean a trick to optimize the training of the neural nets. And then you have the neural network architecture here. So the number of hidden layer and the number of neurons per layer. Each neuron is actually related to each input and to each neuron of the next layer. And it is characterized by, it's here, by a function, by a bias, and by a weight. And actually, the output of a single neuron is a function applied to the weighted sum of the inputs plus the bias. And so if you are combining all these neurons, then you can model very complex relationships or complex relationship. And the idea is just that you have to optimize the parameter of the neural networks, which means the bias, the weight, as well as the architecture, to get a good estimate of your biophysical variables. So actually, when you are doing the training, what you are doing is you are initializing the weight and bias for the different neurons. Then you run your neural network. You estimate the biophysical variable. You look at the difference between your estimate and your value in the training data set. And if this difference is too high, then you update the weight and bias and so on iteratively until you get a good accuracy or an expected accuracy on your biophysical variables. So actually, the training of a neural network is takes some time. Yeah.
When you change your weights or your bias, you do it by expertise, by experience?
No, it's an optimization method, gradient descent or Needlemean. You have many ways of doing it. Yeah. But actually, what is, I mean, you can try, yes, the architecture is something important because if you put too many neurons, then you have overfitting. And if you put if you have not enough neurons, then you cannot fit your relationship. So this is the main thing. And then you can use different learning algorithms, but from my experience, you get very similar results. It's just a question of time, or maybe sometimes of number of training cases in your training data set. Okay, so I didn't remember I put that. So this is actually extracted from the paper I've told you from Weiss. So this is done on experimental data set. I think it's Chris Proba with on the Spark on the Barracks site, agricultural site, and it tested here. You see different regression techniques. So very classical least square, support vector regression, kernel ridge, Gaussian process, and neural network. So this is so these are the results of the root mean square error between estimated chlorophyll, leaf row index, and vegetation cover fraction over the training in blue or on the validation in red. So what you can see is that the regression are actually outperforming the linear regression. So this demonstrates the usefulness of the machine learning methods. And what you can see also is that you have always better accuracy on the training as compared to the validation data set. So this is still the crucial thing when you are training machine learning is that you must be careful not to overfit your data. And this is actually the tricky thing. Okay, so if I speak about regression, the advantages, what are they? First, it's very fast. And it's even quite fast when you are training, if you are using machine learning. It depends on the size of your training data set. But if you are using experimental data, generally you don't have a lot of ground measurements, so it doesn't take a lot of time. And so the thing is that you need to find the optimal set of parameters when you are using machine learning. And some tuning is mandatory. So this is what I said for neural networks. You are trying, what you do, I think, actually is you try different architecture, you look at your result, and then you select the architecture that is working well. And it is quite the same for the other machine learning technique. You have hyperparameters or things like that need to be tuned. And generally, it's made by try and test, and I don't remember the expression in English. But sorry?
Trial and error.
Well, okay. So the drawbacks of the regression is that the training data set and the domain definition are the key. That means don't apply your regression on data that are too much different of your training data set. And so to be sure that your technique will work, then take care of the representativeness of your training data set. So the variability, the acquisition condition, the noise associated to the data, and so on and so on. And also, one of the drawbacks, as compared to radiative transfer model inversion, some of radiative transfer model inversion method is that you only focus on the variable of interest. This is actually a drawback, but also an advantage, because what you are doing is you are minimizing, when you are optimizing your relationship, you are minimizing on the variable of interest. So you are really focusing on that one. But when you are doing some radiative transfer, for some methods of radiative transfer model inversion, you are minimizing over the reflectance. So the reflectance is a result of the combination of different variables. So actually, you may get less accuracy, but you get as well leaf index at the same time as, for example, leaf inclination angle or leaf chlorophyll. So you can have an idea of the ambiguity between those parameters. And if you, I should come back to, if you remember the graph I showed where you get different combination of leaf index and chlorophyll for the same set of reflectances, then you can get the actual distribution of these two variables. So this is also something of interest. Okay, so maybe we can stop here. Just yes, sorry.
I've heard that neural networks are very data hungry. So how much training do you need for training the neural network? How do you obtain it? How should I say?
So this is a big question. So you have two ways. Actually, I will speak about it after, but you have two ways of training. Either you train on simulation or you train on data, on experimental data. Experimental data, generally, you use all that you have because you don't have enough. And then you do some cross-validation and so on. And it's actually the applicability of your method is very restricted by your training data set and so on. And if you are using radiative transfer model simulation, then you can use as much as you want. Generally, we use about 40,000, something like that. But the idea is, again, even if you can use less, but in that case, what is crucial is the shape of the distribution of your variables in your simulation and the covariance, I mean the co-distribution of your variables. So I think it's not a problem of a number, but it's a problem of distribution, value distribution, and combination of variables. Yeah. Okay, so I come back to my presentation. So after the empirical methods, now I will speak about radiative transfer model inversion. So as I said, you can only assess with the radiative transfer model itself, you can only assess the canopy, what we call canopy primary variables, which are quite limited as well. So this is a general scheme. You have some characteristics of the canopy, your variable of interest. Then your radiative transfer model is able to simulate your observation from remote sensing. And you are using, okay. And then you are using your inversion technique to get back to your variable of interest. And you can also include some a priori information or prior information to improve the result of your inversion technique. So you have several problems to face. First, which radiative transfer model should I use? Then, what kind of configuration should I use? So again, if you are using satellite data, it's very limited. You are using the configuration of the satellite, but at least you can use a selection of bands, not all the bands, for example. And which inversion technique will I use? And finally, which prior information and how can I use it in my inversion process. So this is the outline of the following. First, I will focus on, on the on the choice of the radiative transfer model. So what is a radiative transfer model? So this is a description of canopy and with some boundary condition. What are the illumination condition? What is the soil background reflectance? And then you describe the canopy, its structure. So first, what are the vegetation elements and how they are placed from each other. So this is the architecture. And then, sorry. And then you have the optical properties of each of your elements. So if you have leaves, stems, brown trunks, or things like that, you need to know their reflectance and their intrinsic reflectance and transmittance. And then you look at the way these different elements are interacting in terms of reflection, diffusion, and absorption in the different wavelengths you are looking at. So maybe I will wait. That's okay. I'll just go back. Yeah. Okay. So I just go back to the outline of the following talk. I will speak about the first radiative transfer model, then inversion method, then the observational configuration, and the way you can use prior information to improve the accuracy of your estimate using by inverting your model, when inverting your model. So as I said, the radiative transfer model is a combination of vegetation elements and their optical properties and the architecture of the canopy, the way the vegetation elements interact between each other, and the boundary condition, I mean the illumination, the direction and the diffuse fraction, and also the soil background reflectance. So to describe the canopy structure, you have different ways. And you can go from the very simple one, the well-known turbid medium model, which is a kind of leaf soup with some, which have a preferential inclination. And so you have only 3 parameters describing this structure, which are the leaf index, the leaf inclination, and the relative leaf size to describe the hotspot. And then you can go to much more realistic structure description. that takes into account many things, including different elements, the stems, the leaf, and their size, their shape, also their curvature, the number of plants, and so on and so on. If you are looking at forest, you can look at the crown diameter, the trunks, and so on. This is for the structure. And then also you have to, if you have different vegetation elements, you have to simulate the reflectance and transmittance of the optical properties of each of these elements. And this is most of the time done with the prospect model, but you have also, so this is a model which is, yes, I put here a paper from Stéphane Jacquemou, who is actually the author of Prospect, but he made a paper with, that describes the different models that are existing from the most simple to the most complex. And this is the same as for the canopy, actually. You can, Prospect is quite simple. It considers the leaf as an ensemble of plates, of n layers, and it looks at the interaction of these different layers. But you can also consider the leaf as it should be with the mesophyll structure here, and look at all the interaction inside the leaf. And this is a kind of, this is a spectrum, reflectance spectrum and transmittance spectrum of a leaf, of a typical green leaf. I don't remember, sorry, what kind of leaves, but this is a typical one. And you can, the absorption is shown here. So you can see that in the visible, so in the PAR domain, the main feature that is happening is absorption. And you can see here 2 peaks that correspond to water absorption. So in the vegetation optical, the leaf optical properties are actually driven by the leaf biochemical content, so including chlorophyll, water, dry matter, and brown pigments. You have also some version of prospects which are using sorry, yes?
Yes, by curiosity, reflectant and transmittant, does it have to sum +1? Not necessarily from what I see.
Yeah, no, the reflectance, transmittance plus absorptance equals 1. So this is this is the reflectance, this is the transmittance, and inside it's absorptance.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so what I was saying is you have to, so the optical properties are driven by the biochemical content. So you have versions that takes into account, for example, anthocyanins, which make also the difference between chlorophyll A and B and carotenoids, for example. You need the leaf reflection index, but for that we have some estimates. And you need also to describe the leaf structure. So this is what is called mesophyll structure parameter in prospect, which indeed indicates the number of layers. So if you have dicotyledonous plants, the number of layers is higher than for monocotyledonous. Sorry. Okay. So, and this is actually the same for the leaf and for the canopy. You have different, as I said, different level of complexity. Turbid medium. You have also geometrical models which are, in fact, relying on the optics to solve the radiative transfer models. And you have also hybrid models which combine geometrical and turbid mediums. That means you have geometrical elements, and each element is itself a turbid medium. And then you have 3D models, which are based on radiosity or ray tracing methods, where you launch photons and you look at the trajectory of the photon inside the canopy until it gets out. So if you look at the different criteria that I put there, so the accuracy, so the better you describe the structure and the better you describe the photon path, the better accuracy you get, I mean, to simulate reflectance from vegetation description. But this is also at the cost of computing power. Sometimes it can take a lot of time to simulate just one canopy, and also the number of variables, and it can take a lot of time to build a mock-up like this. And the data are often not available, depending on what you want to simulate. So you have to make a balance, but if you're using a turbid medium model, you need very few parameters, so just LAI, leaf inclination, and the relative size of the leaves. So it's very easy actually to do your simulation, but your accuracy will decrease. So depending still on what you want to do, you need to have a good balance between the realism of the model you are using and its complexity. So now if I go to the inversion method, let's say I have chosen my radiative transfer model. Now I want to invert it. So you have several choices again. So this is what I've spoken about this morning, empirical calibration over ground measurements. But you can also do that on simulation, still using some machine learning regression or regression. And this is the same thing, but you are calibrating on simulations. And here you have other methods which are also used since a long time, which are optimizations. That means you use your radiative transfer model, you simulate, you take an initial guess of your variables, then you do your simulation, you get your reflectances, you compare them to what you are measuring, and if the difference or if the error is too high, then you can update your surface variable using still gradient descent algorithms, simplex algorithms, things like that, to update to simulate the reflectance, and so on, so on. You do that iteratively until you get a good match between your simulated reflectance and what you have measured. For lookup table, it's quite the same thing, except that you first simulate a training data set, well, what you call a training data set, but here the training data set is the lookup table. So you have a range of cases with a range of combination of variables and the corresponding spectral reflectance. And you just compare what you have, you compute the cost function between what you are measuring and all the cases of your lookup table, and you select the cases that are the closest from what you have measured. So it's a very simple way to do in theory. So lookup table are actually what is implemented for the MODIS algorithm, main algorithm. And you can look at the paper if you want to more information on that. You have a paper from Maineni and Yurik Niazekin from the Boston University, where you have a nice description of the method. Okay, so sorry, so I didn't. I think I'm not sure I did that. So you have two kinds of methods: the methods which are minimizing on the biophysical variables, which I say you just focus on the variable and you want to get the variable, or you minimize on your reflectances. And if you do that, then you can assess all the variables that are involved in your radiative transfer model. So this is what I say that. So for the optimization, the problem is that it is an iterative method and you have to do it. Each time you get some new measurements. So if you want to apply that to a wall image, it can take a lot of time. You have some solutions which have been published in the literature, which are the use of adjoint model, which is a derivative of your radiative transfer model. So I didn't put some references, but I can tell you if you come and see me. The problem also is that these methods are very sensitive to local minima. That means if your function is, your error function is something which is kind of like this with some very flat area. So I should have put a curve. Then you can get in that flat area, and it's a minimum local. So you need, if you're implementing such a method, then you need to try several several guests to be sure that all your optimization will converge to the same solution. If it does not, that means that you are in a local minimum. Okay. For lookup table, it's the same as for regression. Training dataset and domain definition are the key. So you need to be representative of what you will observe with your sensor. Okay, so this is an exercise that we have done. So it's a paper in RSE in 2002 from Combal, where we made some intercomparison results between different methods. So this is neural nets, lookup table, and optimization here. And for several variables, leaf-row index, chlorophyll, canopy chlorophyll content, fAPAR, and fCover. And this is the root mean square that we got. And you can see that we have, the optimization, the neural nets gave the best results, but the thing is that it depends really on the way you are implementing the method. In that case, for optimization, it is because the initial guess of the data was just set to a given combination of variables, and we did not use different ones. We did not optimize the initial guess, actually. So, so again, it's the same as for, yes?
I have a question. You had that with neural networks, the normalization.
Yeah.
How can that be done, or is there a general rule how to?
On the normalization, you just normalize by mean. You mean mean and max. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, very standard. You need actually just a question for the mathematical optimization for the initialization of weight and bias. So you just need your data to be between 0 and 1 or -1 and on 1. And actually also it's because if you are, for example, using I don't know, reflectance value with how can I say? Or if you are using, for example, reflectance in the near infrared and reflectance in the green for canopies, so reflectance in the near infrared will be much higher than the green. So if you don't normalize, then the near infrared will have more influence on your results.
And if you have additional data later on, so you're doing calibration on the model, like here, in the optimization step, and then later on you have other measurements. Usually the normalization does not need to fit. It might be different.
No, you normalize by the value, the min and max on your training data set. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So again, what I was saying is that you don't mind the method. The method, you will choose one method or another just because it's easier to implement, it's faster, or things like that. But the thing is, the way you are implementing it is crucial still. What kind of prior information you will give? For example, when you are building your training data set, you put some prior information. For example, you could just design a neural net only for maize or for wheat. So you just put structure and specific distribution of the variables that fits what you can, the variability you can find on wheat only, for example. You need also to use the model that is the best suited to your application and to the uncertainty you are ready to get. And also you are, limited by constraints, and generally it's computing time because you want to apply your algorithm on several images, and it can take some on each pixel of several images. It can take some time. So I put here some results we got recently, where we trained a neural network either on the sail, so this is on the left, or on a 3D model, which was specifically designed for wheat here and for maize. Here it's wheat, top and bottom it's maize. And so these two models, these two neural networks were trained on a 3D model. I would say 4D model because there is a simulation also of the time of the growth of the two species. And you can see here that, so this is a validation against 3D simulation. And you can see that the 1D model provides worse results than the 3D model. Of course, because the 3D model is more specific and is more accurate to simulate the reflectance. So when you invert, it gives you better results. But when we wanted to train our neural networks, if you are using the 1D model, it takes you 40 minutes. And if you are using the 3D model, it takes you 1 month with the same computer. And as well as we were lucky because for those two species, we had a 3D architecture model which was coming out from a PhD thesis. So someone took 3 years to provide those mockups. So that means it's a lot of work. And if you want to extend that to other species, that means that you need to generate a 3D architecture model. And believe me, it's not easy to find. Okay, and the thing also here is if you look at the increase in accuracy for wheat and for maize, the increase is much higher on maize. And actually, we did that also on chlorophyll and observed the same thing. And this is why? Because when you look at the wheat, actually at the beginning of the growth, it's not very, in agreement with the turbid medium assumption, so the 1D model assumption. But then when it's coming to grow, it's kind of a soup of leaves. It's much more like a turbid medium than if you look at a maize crop, where you always see the rows, and so you have a very structural effect. So the use of 3D here, of course, increases the accuracy.
Excuse me?
Yes?
Those 8 bands that you guys use, where is it coming from?
It is Sentinel-2. I will speak about it after. Yes, we selected several bands because, I will tell after. If I have the time, yeah. Yes. This is a simulation. A 3D simulation. Yes, this is a model. This is a model which is based on Lux Render, which is a renderer engine. So maybe we can speak after. There is a publication on it, on this model.
You mentioned about an improvement, but
yeah.
honestly, if you
Yeah.
put in a balance, it's not really worth to
Yeah.
try
Oh, sorry. So this is something I show on the. No, sorry. I said it's on. I said it's on simulation, but it's not on simulation. It's on actual ground measurements. If I show you that on. Sorry, I didn't put the figures, but if I show you that on a simulation, then you see a very big improvement. The problem is that here you have noise in the data.
Yeah, exactly.
But still, you can see here you have a kind of bias that you don't see here. For me, it's better. Please, tell me it's better.
Hours of processing against 1 month of processing.
Sorry?
But you're jumping from a couple of hours of processing against 1 month
Yeah.
of processing. So
Yeah.
you can wait the 1 month, it's fine.
Still, it depends on your objective. Yeah. Of course, you don't spend time doing 3D simulation if you want an accuracy of 20%. Then use 1D model.
Because it's a sort of parsimony.
Exactly. Yeah. Sure. Okay, so So I don't know why I put this here, because it's an empirical method actually, but yes, because I compared with, okay, because I compared with process simulation. So this is another exercise that we did. Sorry, I didn't put, this is a submitted article by Fernando Camacho from EOLab in Valencia. And so we have a very nice database of ground measurements on several species type, crop species. This is a number, so I don't remember, it's around, I would say, 500, no, it's here, okay, 900 points that we have of leaf row index with the corresponding Landsat 8 reflectances. And this is a database that is available to everybody. You go on the Imagine website, Imagine project website. Again, you can send me a message. I will give you the reference. And we tested several algorithms, so NDVI, ordinary least square, machine learning, either learned on 1D simulation or learned on the data by separating. And we separated the training and the validation data set in 2/3 for the training and 1/3 for the validation. And for the process simulation, depending on if you are using Gaussian processes and neural network, you don't use the same number of, you don't need the same number of simulation. So the size is depending on the method we are using. Okay, these are the results that we got. Sorry. In terms of R-square. This is for the green area index, different methods. So this is a vegetation index, multilinear regression, neural nets, Gaussian processes, and SVM. And this is the difference we get when we learn on experimental data in green and on process simulation in orange. For the different methods, so you can see that we get quite nice results with a much better R2 when you are learning on the ground data, of course. And this is, sorry, I don't remember. And this is the R-square that we get per species for the different for the Gaussian processes. And you can see that depending, this is what I said, depending on the crop species representation in the learning data set, you can get different results. And this is a nice result, for example, for the rice. Nice. Is that for when you learn on ProSane, you get very bad results. And why? This is because when we simulated our training database, just 1 minute, when simulated our training database, we didn't take into account the fact that you can have water on the ground. So it's not in the training database, and when you run it, then you get very bad results because you are not representative.
So I have a question. When you compare those methods, especially machine learning with the ordinary methods, I think the problem will be the training data, especially in machine learning and neural network. You need a huge amount of data, training data to train the model.
Yeah.
So.
No. So, we have with 900 you can get quite good results. We have 900 points, so it makes about 600 for the training.
Question, is it also dependent on the size of the individual, data size of the individual crops? Because I assume that they're different. And
Sure. This is why you have some variability. You have some variability in terms of R2 on the results, because you have some. For example, I don't remember, but it's not. If you look at this distribution, then you have less represented. Sure.
Sorry, one more question. In this case, learning on ProSale, does it mean that they all were learned on the same lookup table, or
not exactly?
With, a priori information for everyone?
Yeah, not exactly, because what I said, if you run Gaussian processes and if you use 50,000 simulation, then it will take a lot of time to train, and it doesn't improve the results. So what we did is we used the same distribution, but not the same number of cases.
And have you experienced using hyperspectral data to improve?
No, we didn't use them. I cannot tell. You can refer to a paper from Katja Richter. She tried lookup tables and but not machine learning. I don't think so. And hyperspectral. The problem with hyperspectral is that you will get lots of inputs, and the more inputs, the more cases. Yes, and what I didn't say is that the machine learning methods are quite sensitive to the noise, because if you are not simulating, for example, I experimented a long time ago. I trained some neural network using the blue bands, and it was for airborne data. Yes, thanks. And so the atmospheric correction was not very good, and so on. So I trained one neural network, I tested it, and then I got very nice results. It was like, wow, wonderful, and so on and so on. So I showed my results to my advisor. He was very happy, but I didn't save my neural nets. And then I run it again, I train it again, and then I get very bad results, and I didn't understand why. And in fact, it was because I trained my network with some process simulation without considering noise in the data, and especially in the blue band. And when I tried on my experimental data, the blue band was so noisy that it was outside the definition domain of my neural networks. So I get very bad results. So this is also an advice that I would say: if you are training neural networks, don't train 2, 3, 4, 5 neural networks, apply them, and get sure that you get the same range of variation. Yeah. Okay. So maybe I'm quite long. Yeah. So choice of the observational configuration. So I will be fast here because you are limited with satellite data. This is what I just said. Do not use the blue band when you want to estimate when you are using radiative transfer model inversion, because generally it's affected by noise due to residual atmospheric effects. So avoid that noise. And also what you can do is use not only all the spectral neutral bands, sometimes just using the most sensitive bands will provide you best results. Okay, of course this is just for the spectral sampling. I put an example of sensitivity of leaf optical properties to the different biochemical contents. So if you want to estimate chlorophyll, you don't use near infrared because there is no sensitivity, for example. Okay, and again, also the directionality. So with Sentinel-2, it's not very important, but depending on what you are using, it can be quite important. The reflectance is varying a lot with the direction of illumination and the direction of view. And this is a 3D simulation as well for different configuration. So in the specular directions, that means when you are facing the sun, and the same canopy, exactly the same canopy, but when you are looking it in the sun direction. So you can see that there is a high contrast in terms of reflectance between the two, and you can use that to better estimate your canopy variables. So there are very old works, very old studies published on that using the Polder instrument, which allows nice BRDF sampling. And you have also now recent study of people using UAV also to study the BRDF and to improve variable estimation.
That would be my question. Like, if you're obtaining this information from low altitude platforms, like UAVs or airbornes, how to get like this information from angle or
you know when you are flying, so you know the sun position, and also you know the position of your plane, and yes, with Arctica.
You have an inertial moment where you have the degrees, the pitch and roll of the platform, but
yes, but if you are doing some, if you are using some photogrammetric softwares, then you can retrieve the position of the camera and get the actual view angle. So it's not a, I don't think it's a very, for UAV, I think yeah, it can be tricky, but the trickiest thing is the illumination conditions that varies during your flight. And you are calibrating at the beginning of your flight, and then you have a cloud passing, and it's very different, and you get also so.
You choose a light radiation sensor.
Yes, but if you have no, we can discuss that after. Okay, so now how to exploit a priori information. So this is not a nice figure, sorry for that, but at least it says what I want to say. First, you have to optimize the training data set. This is what I say. What I said earlier. So the distribution of your variables. So these are the different variables used for here for sale and here for prospects to simulate the Sentinel-2 algorithm training database. And you have also co-distribution here, which you have also to choose. We'll speak about it later. And you have also to take into account the uncertainties on the radiometric data, if you know them, but this is something which is also very hard to get. Okay, so if you are using Bayesian methods, so cost function, like in optimization method or in lookup table, you can consider your cost function just by using the difference between the root mean square error, for example, between your measured reflectance and your simulated one. But you can also put some a priori prior information on the value of your variable. So, for example, if you are observing some wheat in the middle of the season, you know that the different index cannot be between 0 and 1, for example. So you can put it there. But your main problem is how to get this prior information. Because if you put too much accurate prior information, you say, I'm sure it's wheat and I am in the growing season, and actually it's sugar beet or I don't know, whatever, then you will get very bad results. So you have to be careful of, for example, if you are relying on the crop mask, your crop mask may have some errors, and this may have some impact on your results when you apply your method. So okay, so to get this prior information, you can capitalize on past observation, on dedicated experiments, and other ways. Okay, so this is just maybe I'm going fast because I have much to say. I'm good. This is just a slide to show what prior information how the use of prior information can actually reduce the size of the possible solution when you are using, here it's NDVI relationship, but for example, here you just say, okay, my measurement is NDVI, but I know that my distribution of Liffer index is that one. So that means all the solutions for the Liffer index are here. But if I use this a priori distribution, then I can reduce, I am in this area of solution. So it's not very illustrative, but it's a way to better constrain the convergence of your inversion. Okay, and now you can also put some temporal constraints because you know that Liffer index, unless you are in a grassland where someone is cutting the grass, is the vegetation is growing smooth in a smooth way. So that means that you produce biomass every day, and that also the leaf is dying during the senescence in a smooth way. So you can have a priori description of temporal profile of your green area index, for example. And this is a kind of result that you get where you are using, for example, I don't remember, so I think it was with spot data or something like that. It's a paper from Benjamin Cutts, in 2005. And so this is a kind of estimation you get when you are using the dates independently. And this is the estimation you get when you use as a prior information the model that is provided here. So you see that you get quite a nice improvement. And this is what you would get if you are using a simple temporal smoothing between the independent estimation, which also provide quite increase in accuracy. So this is something that we will see this afternoon during the TP.
Is it valid to use prior information gained from experimental LAI data and use the same data for the validation? For example, using this temporal dynamics derived from experimental data, but then use this data again for validation?
I would say no. Actually, the best would be to separate fully the data set. But for example, to fit your model, you have only, I don't remember, 4 parameters. So you can use only, specific dates to fit it, and then to estimate in other dates, for example, some cross-validation. The problem is when you have data, you have so few. It's always difficult to make independent assessment. But the best thing is to do validation, and if you can separate, then separate. Yeah. But you have to be aware that you used the same data, actually. Okay, there are other ways in the literature also, which are, you can use also some special constraints. For example, you are in the same field, so maybe you can assume that the soil is the same within the field or something like that. And also you can limit the factors of variability due to your acquisition, and you can work per page, but instead of working per pixel, you can work per patch to reduce problems which are due to your instrument characteristic, and especially some registration problem from date to date, and also the impact of the sensor point spread function. Okay, so I should finish at 30, right? Just a few words about the data assimilation in crop functioning model. So the thing is, you have a crop functioning model which you can use, which you have parameterized, and you can use to simulate, for example, the yield at harvest. Then you get some remote sensing data acquisition. I hope that with Sentinel-2 you get more than that during the crop growth cycle. And doing that, you use the estimate, for example, of a green array index to better constrain your simulation, and so to update every time you get new data, either the parameters of the crop functioning model, or to update the crop functioning simulation. This is called forcing. To better fit your actual curve, and so correct your prediction with your crop functioning models. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit tired. So this is an example of results that we got also. So we used a very crop functioning model which is called STIX. It's a big crop functioning model. That means we have about, I don't remember, but something like 400 or 700 parameters to be tuned that you don't, it's very difficult to know all of them. So what you do is you use some leaf index estimated from remote sensing data, update your problem and to update sticks, some of the sticks parameters. So this is for free fields, as you can see here, and the crop functioning models was exactly parameterized the same for a given field. This is the reason why you get these big squares. But when you are assimilating the data pixel per pixel in each field, the leaf index estimated from spot, this is what the model, the kind of leaf index that the sticks crop functioning model is able to estimate. So you can infer actually the variability, the intrafield variability of your field using the crop functioning model. And this is for leaf index, but also for other variables. So this is the nitrogen content, the plant nitrogen content. You also better estimate, and you estimate the field intra-variability. Okay, so I don't think I have a lot of time, but maybe I will continue this afternoon about temporal smoothing. Yes, maybe I can try to do it. So when you are estimating different index or fAPAR, still, as I said earlier, you expect a smooth temporal profile, but for some problems, for some reason, first you have some gaps because you have some clouds or some snow, and also you have some noise in the data, and sometimes some points which are, I don't know if I put some here, but which are kind of unexpected, with very, for example, those one or things like that. So, and this noise is due to the pre-processing. Very often you can have some noise due to miscloud detection with some sudden drop in the temporal profile or things like that. So what you have to do is to smooth your data. So you have different way of doing that, and we will see that this afternoon. Is first one, you just use statistical methods. So interpolators like spleen, and you will see that this is not a good way of doing it because spleen functions are actually fitting to the points, but are not trying to smooth the whole profile. You have decomposition method which splits the signal into additive components and return the informative components. Generally, there is a high frequency. You remove the noise by removing the component with high frequency. And you have other methods which are based on curve fitting on limited temporal windows. So you're just using, for example, the growing part or a little, I don't know, a temporal window of a few days, a decade, for example. And you fit a very simple function. So the most known is Savitsky-Golay, which makes some local polynomial fitting. So for each of this method, you have always some tuning to do to optimize the parameters of your method. So I mentioned here the timesat toolbox, where you have different methods which are already implemented, and you can play with them if you want to have a look at the performances of this method. So I have just a slide here that shows a comparison. I think, yes, I put the paper here. So he made some comparison between decomposition techniques, curve fitting techniques, and here, just by applying a climatology, I think it is done on MODIS data. And this is a crop site. And you can see the different results of the different, with the different methods. Of course, the result depends on the availability of the number of data, as well as the distribution of the data through time. And this is very important, impact a lot the result of the decomposition technique. And the thing is, here you have a comparison of the root mean square error between the measured point and the one that are obtained after applying the smoothing algorithm. So if you want to fit the point, then the RMSE must be very low. And the roughness is actually 1 minus the smoothness. So if you have a value of 1, that means that you are fitting very well all the points, but your profile cannot be is not very smooth, because if you have some 2 points, 3 points, one low, one high, one low, then you will get something like that. Okay. So, and you can see that different methods, of course, provide different results, but still, it again depends on your objective. Do you want a very smooth temporal profile, or do you want to be very close to your data? So you have to find a compromise, and to find a compromise that suits your application and your objective. Then this is what what I've shown previously from the result from Benjamin and also Grégory Duveillet, where they used a very, very, very basic crop functioning model, which consider growing phase and the senescent phase. I don't go on it because we will use it this afternoon. Okay. So finally, what do you want to check when you are using a product? What you need to pay attention is, what is the definition of my product? Is it really in agreement with what I want to do, what I will use it for, and so on? The inversion algorithm you are using. Are your observation conditions in equation with the training data set? When I say observation condition here, it's not the spectral bands or whatever. Is it the same climate? Is it the same environment? And the same soil, same illumination conditions, and so on. Second, are the model assumptions in adequation with the structure of the observed canopy? For example, some people use the Sentinel-2 LAI algorithm on forest. It's nonsense, because we use sail at 10 meter or 20 meter resolution. No forest is like a turbid medium, so you cannot use it, for example. Then, if the prior information is used, is this prior information realistic or in agreement with what I'm doing? This is also important. And then, was the algorithm validated? Because this is the list. And which accuracy can I expect? And is it in agreement with my objective? Do I have to develop my own inversion problem because I don't get enough accuracy, for example? And also, often people are using, for example, Sentinel-2, we say it's 10 meter resolution, actually, or 10 or 20. Actually, it's not 10 or 20, because you have the PSF. And so you are not observing, actually, I think I have, yes. You are not observing, you have a square pixel, but actually what is inside your square pixel is what is in this circle area due to the point spread function, which means the spatial response of your sensor. So for example, if you are looking at coarse resolution sensor, we made a simulation with, I think it's for the vegetation platform sensor. This is the size of 1 kilometer resolution. This is the diameter of the site, so this round place. And this is the percentage of the signal provided by the site itself. And that means that actually, if you want to be sure that what you are looking at is inside, you have 90% of the pixel which is composed of what you are looking at, you need to use a 10 kilometer size. So that means you are looking at 1 kilometer pixel. But if you want to be sure that what you are observing corresponds to the surface, you want sorry, I'm not very. I mean, you need a 10 kilometer size to be sure that in your 10 kilometers, 90% of your surface is contributing to your signal. So the PSF is something which is quite annoying. Less annoying when you are at 40 meters, but for example, or 10 meters. But for example, if you are near the borders of your field, your pixel may be very affected by the border, or if you have very little fields, then you can have the influence of the field which is close to your field. So this is something important, especially when you have basil and maize or something like that, or dense canopy. Okay, so this is for this afternoon. Because I finished, and I will just describe the Sentinel-2 algorithm, how we implemented it. Okay. So, I'm sorry. Thank you. So I just want also to thank Frédéric Barré, because I'm working with him since a long time, and he did a lot of this work, and all the people who spent some time with us in our team. So I don't give all the names, but there are many people who contributed to those results as well. Yeah. Thank you.